After years of quiet sacrifice, Evelyn reclaims her voice, her family's legacy, and the land that was almost lost to greed. As her journey unfolds, she fights not just for the ranch, but for her place in her own story, her true self. In a battle of wills with her son James, Evelyn learns that even after decades of silence, it's never too late to stand up, to be seen, and to rewrite the ending of her life. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. It was supposed to be a day of joy, but when he told me I was too old to dance, it was like everything I had built for him, for us, crumbled. I stood there, stunned, my hand still halfway extended. James didn't even look back. He just kept laughing with his bride as the music started, the soft glow of string lights catching the edge of his smile. Too old to dance. The words echoed like a slap, not whispered, not said in jest. Just cold, sharp, efficient, like I was one of the vendors he had already paid. I turned away, careful not to let my face crack in public. The DJ transitioned into something swingy and bright, and people flooded the floor, his new in-laws, her cousins, strangers who would be in his photos for life. But I stood on the outside, the woman who raised him, reduced to silence by one casual cut. A server passed with champagne. I took 2 flutes. I sipped one quickly, barely tasting it. My eyes locked on James, as he spun his bride in a dip I'd taught him in our tiny kitchen when he was 7. Back then we danced barefoot on cracked linoleum, and he'd say, "Again, mommy, again." My stomach turned. I wandered to the edge of the tent. The night air cooled my cheeks, flushed from embarrassment, more than wine. Behind me, laughter swelled. My role today had been clear. Wear beige, smile in photos, keep quiet. I had been cast, not invited. Years of sacrifice unspooled in my mind. Night shifts, missed birthdays, meals skipped so he could have new cleats, art lessons, SCT tutors, all of it, so he could become the kind of man who now told me I was too old to dance. There had always been a distance between us. I chalked it up to time, to the way suns pull away, but now I saw it was something deeper, something chosen. I looked down at my hands, still strong, steady. They had held him through fevers, tantrums, broken hearts, and now they were empty. People passed by, brushing against my dress like I wasn't even there. One woman glanced at me and smiled awkwardly, as if unsure whether to offer a nod or just keep walking. I smiled back, the kind of practiced expression that doesn't touch your eyes. A slow song began. James and his bride clung to each other, whispering like they were the only 2 people on earth, and maybe to him, they were. I finished the second glass of champagne. Somewhere, a bridesmaid squealed. Someone's child cried. But all I could hear was his voice, flat, dismissive. "You're too old to dance." I wasn't angry, not yet. I was erased. That's what it felt like my entire identity had been folded neatly and stored away in a drawer labeled "Mother Retired." But I wasn't done. I wasn't some used-up chapter in his origin story. I was a woman who had built a life from scraps, who had weathered every storm and still showed up in pearls and lipstick. I had danced alone in the dark more nights than he'd ever know. I stepped back inside the tent, the music and laughter wrapping around me like insulation I no longer needed. Then I saw it, the microphone. It sat beside the DJ booth, untended, gleaming beneath the stage light, just a few feet away, waiting. I set down the empty flute, took a breath that tasted like lemon and salt, and walked toward it, each step steadier than the last. As I grabbed the microphone, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a dance, it was about reclaiming everything I had lost. My fingers brushed the microphone, and for a heartbeat, I hesitated. The silver body was cool to the touch, too cool for a July evening. I could hear the music winding down, something jazzy, giving way to idle chatter. Glasses clinked, shoes scraped the dance floor, laughter curled through the tent like perfume. And I stood at the edge, one hand on the mic stand, the other trembling at my side. No one noticed me, not yet, but that was about to change. I thought of every moment I had swallowed my voice, every PTA meeting I left early because James had a recital, every job offer I turned down because it meant moving too far from his school district. I thought of the scraped knees, the colicky nights, the little paper stars he used to tape above my bed after I worked double shifts. And I thought of today, of beige dresses, of smiling through clenched teeth, of too old to dance. No, not tonight. I drew a breath, the kind that comes from someplace deeper than the lungs. Then I stepped forward. The DJ turned, startled. He looked like he was about to say something, but my hand was already on the mic. I nodded once, cool, composed, unshakable. He stepped back, unsure. The music died entirely. A hush fell over the tent. It took a few seconds for people to register what was happening. Chairs creaked. Conversations paused mid-sentence. All eyes shifted to the woman at center stage. Me. I heard someone whisper, "Is that the groom's mother?" Yes. And no. I scanned the crowd slowly, letting the moment breathe. James stood near the dance floor, his arms still draped around his bride's waist. His smile faltered as our eyes met. Good. I raised the microphone, my voice catching for a fraction of a second before it smoothed out. "I'd like to share something," I said, just for a moment. No one interrupted. The opening notes of the song were already in my head, not some sappy wedding ballad or top 40 fluff. This was an old jazz number, something my mother used to hum while sweeping the porch. I hadn't heard it in years, but I knew every word. I didn't ask permission. I began to sing. The first line came out like a question, shaky and unsure. My voice, unused and dusty, creaked like an old hinge. For a moment I feared it would betray me, that I'd wilt under the pressure, stammer, shrink. But then something clicked. It wasn't just a song, it was a reclaiming. With every verse my voice grew stronger, deeper. I wasn't performing, I was remembering who I was before I became a full-time sacrifice, before motherhood consumed every inch of me, before I was too old, too tired, too invisible. The guests were frozen. Even the waitstaff had stopped. I let the last chorus rise from somewhere in my belly, throwing it across the tent like a silk ribbon. It landed on every shoulder, every table, and finally on him. James. He wasn't smiling now, his jaw clenched, his bride stared, blinking fast. Around them, silence bloomed. And then it was done. I lowered the mic gently. The silence that followed was thick, almost sacred. For a second, no one moved. Then someone, an older woman in a floral shawl, clapped, slowly, deliberately, and then another joined, and another, but not James. He shoved away from his wife and strode across the floor, red-faced, eyes wide. I stepped down from the makeshift stage, just as he passed me. He didn't say a word, just brushed past hard and stormed out into the dark. The first note left my lips, and suddenly I felt free, as if the years of pain, the quiet suffering, all poured out. The air in the tent tightened the moment I began. This wasn't the kind of song you expected at a wedding. There were no swelling violins or pop refrains. It was simple, a lullaby my mother used to hum when bills piled too high and hope felt far. I hadn't planned to sing it. It simply rose up from a place that had waited too long to be heard. The first few bars trembled on my tongue, fragile and exposed, but with each breath, I felt lighter, like the words carried more than melody. They carried every silent dinner, every withheld thank you, every time I let someone else take the credit. They carried James's childhood scraped raw onto my back, and all the parts of me that had vanished along the way. Some guests blinked, unsure whether they should watch or look away. One woman looked almost embarrassed for me. Another reached for her phone, then thought better of it. A few leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity outweighing discomfort. But I didn't sing for them. I sang for the girl I once was, the one who wanted to be a jazz singer, who spent her teenage summers in second-hand record stores, dreaming of stages. I sang for the woman who gave that dream up the day her pregnancy test came back positive, and the father disappeared before the second stripe even dried. Each note stretched wide across the tent like silk catching wind. James didn't meet my eye. He stood stiffly beside the cake table, shoulders tense, fists clenched at his sides. His new bride whispered something, but he didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the floor, and I watched his throat tighten with something he couldn't swallow. Let him squirm. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. My voice steadied, anchored by the decades of silence it now undid. I let the song rise, louder now, the way my mother did, when she wanted the whole neighborhood to know she was still standing. I sang for the version of me, who begged hospital billing departments to wait just one more week. For the nights I cried into bath towels, so James wouldn't hear me. For the days I called off sick just to chaperone a field trip he forgot to thank me for. This wasn't revenge, it was a resurrection. The final chorus slowed. I held the last note long enough to feel it crack in the middle, a human break, honest and unhidden. It quivered in the air, like a bird unsure whether it should land or soar, and then silence, pure, unfiltered. The guests didn't quite know what to do. Some stared, mouths parted, a few clapped tentatively. Someone cleared their throat, loud in the quiet. I stood there, hands at my sides, chest still rising and falling from the release, and I realized, I felt taller, not physically, but spiritually, like something inside had taken up space again after years of shrinking. I saw James glance at me then, just a flicker as if by accident. His face was unreadable, but I caught something in his eyes, not just shock, not just embarrassment, guilt, the kind that eats you slowly. He turned abruptly, knocking over a champagne glass, as he shoved past the head table and stormed out, disappearing into the night for the second time, this time with everyone watching. James doesn't speak to me for the rest of the night. It's like I'm invisible to him, as if nothing happened at all. He didn't come back, not for cake, not for the toasts, not for me. After he stormed off, the music stuttered awkwardly before the DJ reset with something overly cheerful, as if noise could scrub the air clean of what had just happened. Conversations resumed, but quieter now. Curiosity buzzed under the surface, glances thrown my way, like paper darts, sharp, fast, and quickly looked away from. I returned to my seat alone. My hands still trembled, but I folded them neatly in my lap like I was praying for decorum. No one said anything to me, not even his brother. She passed my table once, eyes fixed straight ahead, bouquet wilting slightly in her grip. I watched them dance earlier, how he looked at her like she was some fragile treasure. I remember when he used to look at me like that, when I was his whole world. Now I wasn't even the back. Plates clattered, forks scraped china. The guests rallied, determined to have a good time despite the drama. And James, he stayed gone, long enough that I stopped glancing toward the entrance, stopped expecting a return. My table was near the heaters, away from the main action. I could have been furniture. No one noticed the way I swallowed each bite without tasting it. No one asked why I sat so still, but the ache in my chest wasn't from humiliation anymore. It was the weight of knowing this silence. His silence wasn't new. It had started years ago, quietly, like a hairline crack in a window. Missed calls, short replies, birthdays remembered late. The way he stopped asking how I was, unless he needed something, and I had let it happen. I told myself it was just how sons grew up, that he was busy, that it was normal. But now it felt like erasure. A young cousin tripped near my chair and giggled, breaking the spell. I smiled at her, brushing a napkin into my lap, pretending I was still a participant in this party. I kept my mask on, even when my vision blurred for just a moment, just long enough to stay. I didn't cry. Not here. Instead I stood and slipped outside, into the night air, where cicadas hummed, and the wind didn't pretend to be polite. I walked past the glowing lanterns, past the rented photo booth, and its goofy props, until I reached the gravel lot. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace, my lawyer. Grace, just spoke with county records. You may have a legal pathway to reclaim the ranch. Call me Monday. The ranch. The thought hit me like thunder behind my father's land, the one I signed over to James 5 years ago, when he promised to build something permanent for the family. That land had been in our family 3 generations. James said he'd take care of, then sold half to his wife's uncle and gutted the rest to fund their wedding and a downtown condo. He'd promised to protect it like I did him. But now Now there might be a way back. I stood there for a while staring at the message. I didn't smile. I didn't breathe. I just stood, letting the possibility settle in. A spark of control, of justice, of something mine, finally mine again. I turned to walk back in, not because I wanted to rejoin the celebration, but because I refused to sneak away like I was ashamed of something. Then my phone buzzed again. A new message, from James. James, leave the wedding early. I don't want you here. I stared at the screen, heat rising under my skin, not from sorrow this time, but something sharper, clearer. I sat there, my phone in hand, knowing that what I was about to do would change everything. The stars were brighter away from the tent, sharp little diamonds over the gravel lot, where cars idled quietly under strings of Edison bulbs. I leaned against the back bumper of my rental, still holding the phone like it might burn me. James's message glared back at me. Leave the wedding early. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a command, a stripping, like even the title of mother had an expiration date he'd long since decided had passed. I didn't cry. My tears were too wise for that now. Instead I opened a new message. My thumb hovered over Grace's name. The ranch. My father's land. The only place where I ever felt both wild and safe. I could still smell the cedar boards in the barn, still feel the sunburnt grass beneath my feet in July. It had been the heartbeat of our family for decades, until I handed it over in the name of legacy. James had promised to honor it. Instead he turned it into leverage. I called Grace. She picked up on the first ring. I was just about to follow up. I'm ready, Tell me everything. Her voice softened. It's possible, Evelyn. The lease James drafted 5 years ago has a clawback clause. You're listed as a co-signer. He never filed the removal paperwork, which means legally, you still have partial rights. Enough to lease the land again. I closed my eyes. What if I don't want to lease it to just anyone? There was a pause. You're thinking of Sarah. Yes, I said, she loved that land. She helped me clean out the stables after my father passed. She always said it felt like freedom to her. You'd be within your rights, Grace confirmed. It would rattle him, but it's legal. Rattle him. The thought felt petty for a second, but only for a second. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the black glass. My jaw looked stronger in the moonlight, less timid. I opened a new message. Evelyn. Hi, Sarah. I know this may sound strange, but I have a business proposal for you. Are you still interested in running that wellness retreat you used to talk about? Because the ranch might be yours to lease, if you want it. I hovered over the send button. This would change everything. Sarah and James hadn't spoken in over a year. Their divorce had been quiet but bitter, dulled only by the professionalism of lawyers and their mutual exhaustion. But I remembered how Sarah used to walk the land like she belonged to it, like it healed her. James hated that. I didn't do this for revenge. Not entirely. I did it because I wanted the land to have a heart again, and I was tired of letting him decide who got to hold the reins. I hit send. The message whooshed off like an arrow loosed from a bow. Immediately my stomach twisted. The wind rustled through the oak trees, lining the lot, and I thought about how many storms those trees had weathered, how they bent but didn't break. I paced back and forth, across the same 10 feet of gravel, heels crunching softly underfoot. I imagined Sarah reading the message, mouth parting in surprise. I imagined James finding out and turning that same sickly shade of entitled panic he wore when the world stopped catering to him. A few minutes passed, then 10, then buzz. I snatched the phone off the hood of the car, heart thudding. The message lit up the screen. Sarah, I'm in. Let's make it happen. I stared at the words, a quiet pulse rising in my throat. Not fear, not guilt, just possibility. I never imagined it would come to this. But once Sarah agreed, there was no turning back. The cafe smelled like rosemary and regret. We met the next morning early, before the rush. A fog still clung to the windows as I stepped inside, clutching the manila envelope to my chest like it might explode. Sarah was already at the back, tucked into a corner booth, stirring a tea she hadn't tasted. She looked different, softer around the eyes, less guarded than I remembered, but when she stood to greet me, there was a flicker of old steel in her spine. She hadn't forgotten. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. Her smile was faint. Neither was I. We didn't hug, we just sat. Two women joined by loss and something colder, shared betrayal. I slid the envelope across the table. It's all in there. The lease terms. Grace helped me keep it simple. But it's solid. Sarah didn't open it right away. She just rested her fingertips on the edge, staring down like it might bite her. Are you sure about this, Evelyn? This will burn every bridge. I've been walking those bridges alone for years, I said. It's time they burned. Still, she hesitated. I don't want this to be about revenge, she said finally. It's not, I lied. And maybe not a lie exactly. But not the full truth either. After a long pause, she pulled a pen from her purse and signed. The sound of it ink scratching paper was louder than the clinking dishes around us. We didn't toast. We didn't smile. But something shifted between us, an unspoken alliance. Not of friendship, but of purpose. When she handed me the check, I didn't even glance at the amount. I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked out into the gray light. A half hour later, I stood at the ATM outside the credit union. I picked the outdoor kiosk on purpose. Less foot traffic, fewer eyes. The machine was slow, humming like it knew the weight of what it was processing. I fed the check in and watched the confirmation flicker across the screen. Just like that, it was done. Ownership hadn't changed hands, but power had. Across the street, a mother held her daughter's hand as they crossed toward a bakery. The little girl wore a pink raincoat and skipped on one foot, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I thought of Lily. She had spent years watching me fold myself smaller and smaller. Now she watched me stand. When I got back to the car, Lily was waiting in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone. She looked up, eyes narrowing as she studied my face. You okay? She asked. Better than I've been in a long time. She didn't smile, not quite. But something shifted, a quiet kind of respect. And a worry she hadn't voiced yet. This going to get messy? She asked. I stared out at the misty horizon. It already is. We drove in silence for a while, the kind that didn't beg to be filled. When I dropped her off, she leaned in before closing the door. I'm proud of you, Mom. I didn't say anything. My throat was too tight. Back at home, I set the lease folder on the table and stared at it like it might grow legs and walk away. A ribbon of sunlight cut through the blinds, striking the paper like an omen, and then my phone lit up. James. The message was short, cold. Too calm. James, what's happening with the ranch? I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not with fear, but with the sudden realization, he knew, and now, the storm was coming. His voice shakes with anger, but I stand firm, offering no apology. He came by unannounced. No knock, just a thud of footsteps up the porch and the sudden swing of the screen door as it hit the frame with a bark. I didn't even need to look up from the kitchen sink to know it was James. Mom, he snapped, his voice sharp with barely buried rage. What the hell did you do? I dried my hands slowly, then turned. He stood in the doorway like a man who hadn't slept. His tie was askew, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched so tight I could hear it crack. You've been busy, I said, voice calm, steady, controlled. He shoved the lease papers onto the counter between us. Sarah? You leased the ranch to Sarah. I met his glare without blinking. She signed this morning. It's legal. You blindsided me, he hissed. You went behind my back. You gave it to my ex-wife. You think that's not a betrayal. I didn't betray you, James. I reclaimed something that was never yours to dismantle. His mouth twitched. You gave it to me. I entrusted it to you. I corrected. And you sold it off in pieces like it was scrap metal. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed bitterly. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I said, just someone who finally stopped asking for permission. He walked in a slow, tight circle, pacing like a boxer, trying to shake off a hit. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about land. This is about me. About us. I folded the towel on the counter, deliberately slow. Yes, James, it is. He stopped pacing. You think she won't come after me next? You've handed her a weapon. She's building a retreat, I said. Not a war, she is the war, he snapped. The room fell quiet, and then, softer, he tried something else. Something old. You know how hard I've worked to build this life. You know what I gave up. And now you want to tear it down, because what? Because I didn't want to dance with you. I didn't answer. His tone shifted again, now pleading. Mom, come on, we've been through too much. Don't do this. Please. My silence hung there, clean and absolute, in the corner of my eye. Movement. Lily stood at the hallway edge, one hand on the wall, watching everything. Her face was unreadable. James saw her too. His expression faltered, the charm cracking at the edges. Don't look at me like I'm the villain, he said, softer now. I'm your son. And I'm your mother, I replied. And I'm not sorry, he blinked. I moved around the counter and opened the back door. The gesture was clear. He stared at the open doorway like it was a cliff edge. This isn't over, he said. I know, I said. He turned, stopped in the doorway, and glanced back over his shoulder. What's next, Mom? Then he was gone, leaving the screen door swinging like a question no one had the answer to. I added one clause, and his world tilted. The house hadn't cooled since James left. His words still echoed in the wood grain, in the sigh of the refrigerator, in the way Lily kept checking on me without saying anything. But I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, the lease document spread beside my mug of untouched tea. I reread every line with new eyes, not just for what they said, but what they allowed. Sarah had texted that morning, her tone cautious. Sarah, something's come up. I need time before moving in. Still interested, but I might need flexibility. Is that okay? She hadn't asked to back out, just to breathe. She was giving me honesty, and I would give her protection. I opened the document and started typing. Grace's original language was clean, simple, but I added a new clause, low on the page, where most readers stopped scanning. In the event of any delay in development, the leaseholder retains primary access to the land, and may sublease with written approval from the co-signatory. It sounded harmless, almost boring, but it meant Sarah could stall, and still keep control. It meant James couldn't threaten to repossess or reroute the land for his next business fantasy. It meant the power was in our hands. I leaned back, staring at the screen, then clicked. Behind me, Lily stood in the kitchen doorway. You're really doing it. Her voice wasn't judgmental, just unsure. Yes, he's going to go ballistic. He already has, I said, still facing forward. She crossed the room slowly, arms folded. You're not scared? I am, I said, truthfully. But I'm also done being erased. She looked down at the papers, at my steady hands. You're different now. I'm just becoming someone I should have been a long time ago. Lily nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. I sent the new draft to Sarah, before I could second guess it. Evelyn, updated version attached. This gives you room, let me know. Minutes passed. Then a half hour, I paced. Poured the tea out. Refilled it. When the response came, it was short. Sarah, got it. Signed and attached. Thank you for everything. I downloaded the file, scanned for the initials. Mine. Then hers. It was done. Not just a lease anymore. It was leverage. I stood and walked outside. The sun had dipped low enough to pull long shadows from the tree. I stared toward the western sky, toward the ranch, like I might be able to see it from here, if I wanted it badly enough. And I did. Not the land itself, but what it represented. Roots, yes, but freedom too. A part of myself that had never asked for permission. Back inside, I filed the papers into a fresh manila envelope and tucked them into my desk drawer, under old tax folders and forgotten birthday cards. That's when my phone buzzed. I didn't need to read the sender. But I did. James. The message was crisp. Control. James. Explain why I'm on that document. I stared at it, heart pounding, not from panic, but from the unmistakable shift. He'd seen the clause. He understood. I locked my phone screen and exhaled, knowing the leverage wasn't a threat. It was a beginning, and he wasn't ready for it. He thought he was a silent partner. He was about to pay. Grace didn't waste words. He never filed the paperwork to remove your name. His mistake. You're still a legal co-signer. That clause is binding. I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone tucked to my ear, watching the last of the morning light crawl across the tile. Can he undo it? No, she said. Not without your signature. I didn't smile, but something in my chest uncoiled. Grace paused. You okay? I'm steady. Good. Because he's not gonna come calmly. I hung up just as gravel crunched outside the window. Then a car door slammed. James. I stayed where I was, mug still warm in my hands, pulse even. I didn't need to peek through the curtain. The rhythm of his boots was enough. Short, angry strides. I knew that walk. I'd known it since he was 15 and sulking over a missed allowance. He didn't knock. The screen door flung open and clattered shut. He stood in the kitchen doorway like a storm wearing a tie. His sleeves were rolled, jaw set. He held the lease papers in one hand, creased, folded, stained with sweat at the edges. You put my name on this. I didn't even blink. Your name was already on it. You added me to the clause. He snapped, holding the page out like it burned. You left yourself on the contract. I said. That wasn't my doing. His eyes were wild, reddened. This is sabotage. No, James. This is consequence. He threw the lease onto the counter. It skidded past my coffee mug and landed against the sugar bowl. You think this makes you clever? It makes you petty. I sipped my coffee. It makes me prepared. He took 2 steps closer. You had no right. I had every right. You gutted the ranch, sold half of it to strangers, and then had the gall to tell me I didn't belong at your wedding. He shook his head, pacing now. You're turning Sarah against me. I didn't need to. You did that on your own. I gave you everything. He yelled. And you just what? Twist a knife and call it justice? You gave me scraps, I said. And now you're angry that I turned them into leverage. A beat of silence, then footsteps. Lily. She stood in the hallway, arms folded, her presence loud in its stillness. James looked at her, then back at me. Does she know what you're doing? Lily didn't move. I didn't answer. I'm your son, he said, voice cracking. How do you justify this? I met his eyes. By finally choosing my son. He stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the point. His voice dropped to a growl. You're going to regret this. I stepped around the island, slowly, and opened the back door. A cold wind pushed past us like punctuation. I already regret not doing it sooner. He grabbed the lease from the counter, tearing it slightly at the corner, and stormed to the door. Just before he crossed the threshold, he paused and looked back. What's next, Mom? He asked, voice low, almost taunting. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen. One message lit up in bold. Your ranch story is trending nationwide. Outrage and applause painted the comments page. I hadn't even made it to the kettle when my phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. Dozens of notifications flooded in. News apps, social media alerts, messages from numbers I didn't recognize. My name was trending, not just in our town, not just in the state, nationwide. Lily was the one who said it out loud first. She stood in the hallway, holding her phone like it had grown teeth. Mom, you're going viral. The article was on a blog I'd never heard of. Something regional that got picked up and syndicated by a national network. The headline read, Mother reclaims family ranch from son's corporate plans and sparks debate over legacy and revenge. They used a photo of the ranch from 2 summers ago, before James sold off the back pasture. My name was bolded. So was the piece quoted anonymous wedding guests and hinted at the lease with Sarah, though they didn't mention her by name. But the comments, that's where the story really lived. Finally, a woman who fights back. She raised him. She owns that land. She's bitter and vindictive. Clearly couldn't handle being sidelined. The comments came in waves. Some called me a hero. Others painted me as the villain in some operatic family drama. And I didn't feel either. I felt real. By noon, a local reporter called. She wanted an interview. Just a short phone segment. She promised, "You'd be a voice for so many women who feel erased." James, meanwhile, stayed silent, which somehow made things worse. He didn't post, didn't clarify, didn't defend himself, and the more he resisted, the more the public filled in the blanks. They called him greedy, spoiled, a textbook son who took and never gave back. His silence screamed louder than any statement. In the quiet moments, I started writing. Not a rant, not a defense, just the truth. I wrote about the ranch and my father's calloused hands, about long nights stitching costumes for James's school plays and eating soup for dinner 3 days straight, so he could have cleats for baseball. I wrote about the guilt of growing older, the humiliation of being told I was too old to dance, and the deep holy decision to finally reclaim something for myself. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but Lily did. She sat beside me on the couch, laptop on her knees, helping me fix commas and trim sentences that rambled. "You don't need to prove you're good," she said once. "You just need to tell the truth." It was the kind of thing I would have said to her once. When we finished, she helped me email it to the editor listed in the article's byline. We didn't speak much afterward. She curled up next to me and started a movie we didn't watch. I made tea. My hands didn't shake. Then the email came in. Just a subject line. "We're live Saturday morning." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. The world was about to hear my voice. Not James's. Not anyone else's. Mine. I disclosed my heart and strangers recognized themselves. The op-ed published at 8:01 a.m. By 8:04 my inbox was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone else. Subject lines poured in like floodwater. "You said what I couldn't. My mother needs to read this. You gave me courage." By 8:07 my name was back on social media's tongue. Someone had clipped the last paragraph, my words about standing tall after decades of being small, and posted it beside a photo of me from the ranch. I don't know how they got it. I hadn't taken it. But there I was, hands in pockets, shoulders squared, the field behind me sunlit and clean. "Tell her story," the caption read. And people did. Some comments stung, some lifted. Most simply pulsed with recognition. She's a warrior. She's selfish. She's all of us. The sheer volume made me dizzy. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and walked away, breath shallow. I had asked for none of this attention. I had spoken not for the crowd, but for the mirror. Still, I couldn't look away. Lily found me in the hallway, one hand against the wall like I needed grounding. She held up her phone, her eyes wide. "You're trending again." I half laughed, half sighed. "For better or worse?" "Both," she said, leaning against me. "But mostly better." I turned off notifications, silenced calls, and opened the windows. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you remember you have lungs. By 9:30 the op-ed had been picked up by 2 more outlets. Regional, then national. A women's rights blogger linked to it with the headline, "Not just a ranch, one mother's public reckoning." I didn't feel famous. I felt raw, open, seen in a way that was both healing and terrifying. Then came the voicemail. A woman named Rachel from the Women's Leadership Foundation. Her voice was warm, clear, almost reverent. "We read your piece. We've been following your story. We'd be honored if you'd speak at our spring summit." I let the message sit in my inbox for an hour. Then another. Then Lily nudged me. "You should say yes." I looked at her, at the girl who used to braid my hair with fingers too small for the task, at the woman she was becoming, whose silence now held strength instead of fear. "I'm not a speaker," I said. You're a survivor, she answered. That's more important. That afternoon, I replied, Evelyn, thank you. I'd be honored. We spent the next few hours answering messages, not all of them, but the ones that needed answering. Women wrote from Ohio, Oregon, Maine, places I'd never been, yet suddenly felt known by. Some wrote pages, others wrote 2 words, thank you. I cried more than once. But not out of grief, out of release. Lily watched me from the sofa, a soft smile on her face. You realize this is what change feels like, right? I nodded, wiping my eyes. It's louder than I thought. She moved beside me and rested her head on my shoulder, just like she did when she was small. We didn't speak for a while. The silence felt earned. As the sun began to fade, I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of tea and sat down in the old rocking chair that used to belong to my mother. The breeze was steady, the sky streaked with gold and lavender. I let the weight of everything settle into my bones, not as burden, but as truth. The phone buzzed once in my hand. Grace. Grace. Call me. The test results are back. I stared at the screen, the sky and the horizon beyond, aware, for the first time, that even victories come with shadows. When the doctor paused, I braced. This is my real fight. The clinic waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old magazines. Grace had offered to go with me. Lily insisted on coming. But in the end, I went alone. There was something sacred about walking into truth on your own 2 feet. The receptionist smiled politely, handed me a clipboard I didn't need, and pointed to a seat near the back. I sat, heart ticking steady and slow, like it knew not to jump too far ahead. When the nurse called my name, I followed her down a narrow hallway, painted a tired shade of beige. I sat on the paper-lined table, hands folded, waiting. Then the doctor came in. Her name was Carmichael, sharp eyes, steady voice. She didn't start with the test results. She asked how I was feeling. Like I'm balancing on a wire, I said. She nodded once, then opened the chart. There's a spot, she said. Left lung. Small. We caught it early. It's treatable. I felt my shoulders drop before I even realized they were tight. I swallowed, then nodded. Okay, we'll discuss options, she continued, but you're not facing this alone. With treatment, recovery is very possible. I thanked her, not because I knew what came next, but because I was still standing. When I got home, Lily was pacing the kitchen, her phone in her hand. The moment she saw my face, she froze. It's treatable, I said, and she dropped the phone and sobbed into my arm. We stood there for a long time, swaying like trees in wind we couldn't see. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her face and said, "We'll fight it." I smiled. We already are. That evening, there was a knock at the door. Not a slam, not a shout, just a knock. When I opened it, James stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. He didn't speak, just held out a brown paper bag. Inside, chicken soup and lemon bars. I heard, he said softly. I nodded. Come in. He sat at the table where we'd fought only weeks ago. This time, he was quiet. He looked around the kitchen, taking in the photos on the fridge, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the counter, the teacup still warm in my hand. I read your piece, he said, eyes not meeting mine. I waited. I didn't know, he added, voice barely audible. All of it. Still, I said nothing. But when I sat down across from him, I noticed something in his face that hadn't been there before. Regret, not as performance, but lived in. Real. I'm sorry, he said finally. It didn't fix everything, but it was the first thing he hadn't tried to bargain. The next day I drove to the ranch. It looked different under winter light. Bare trees, cold wind, slicing through the hills, but it was still mine, still ours. I walked the property line slowly, boots sinking into the soft ground. Birds moved overhead. The fence creaked like an old piano key. I touched the barn door and remembered the calluses on my father's hands, the way he used to say, "The land's always listening." So I told it everything. I told it about the test results, about the summit invitation, about Lily crying, and James not yelling. I told it about fear and hope and the long road that stretched ahead, and the land listened. When I walked back to the car, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Sarah, we need help setting up the nursery. Are you free this weekend? I stared at the screen, stunned, the wind curling gently around me like a question. Maybe the most beautiful one yet, new life on the land, and hope in our heart. I arrived just after sunrise, a box of curtains in one hand, and a bag of lemon muffins in the other. Sarah was already at the ranch, kneeling in the nursery room, with a paintbrush between her teeth and her hair tied up, with a red bandana that reminded me of the farmhands from my childhood. She looked over her shoulder and smiled, not polite, not hesitant, real. Lily trailed behind me, arms full of folded baby clothes we'd gathered from attic boxes and thrift shops, one pair of soft yellow booties balanced on top like a crown. The room had been empty for years, dust in the corners, cracked window panes. But that morning, it smelled like fresh paint and lavender cleaner. The walls were a soft green now, gentle on the eyes. Sunlight slid through the window and landed right on the wooden crib James had helped me build when Lily was born. There was no music playing, but our laughter filled the space like melody. Sarah handed me a hammer. I trust you with nails, just not measurements. I smirked. Still more trustworthy than your ex-husband. She snorted, and Lily stifled a giggle behind her hand. By mid-morning, we had hung curtains, assembled a mobile of stars and clouds, and unpacked blankets, embroidered with lambs. I watched Sarah press her hands to the crib rail, eyes soft with something between awe and ache. I didn't ask questions. Some stories don't need retelling, they just need space. We broke for lemonade, and sat on the porch steps, hands wrapped around mason jars, as the winter sun fought through gray clouds. That's when James pulled up. He parked far back, like he wasn't sure he was welcome, but he walked toward us slowly, head down, a folder under his arm. Sarah tensed, just barely. Lily stood. I nodded to them both. Give us a minute. They disappeared inside, and James sat next to me, silent for a long while. Finally, he spoke. I've been thinking about the land, he said. What it means. What I almost destroyed. He handed me the folder. Inside were proposed lease updates. Cleaner, balanced, with joint stewardship between all three of us. I know I can't undo everything, he added, but I'd like to do better. For the baby. For all of us. I studied the papers, then looked out across the field, now dotted with shovel lines and a half-assembled fence. Rebuilding in progress. He didn't ask for praise, and I didn't offer it, but I nodded once and said thank you. Later, we all gathered at the doorway of the nursery. Lily placed a tiny hand-painted sign above the crib. Welcome home, little one. Sarah unwrapped a braided rug for the center of the room, and I bent down, shaking the dirt from an old doormat I'd stored in the barn. I brushed it clean and placed it just outside the door. Woven into the fabric were the faded words, "This place is love." 3 women, 3 generations of healing, and an unborn child, who would never know the weight of what this land had carried before it made room for. As we stepped back to admire our work, my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my back pocket, and read the new message. Jake, Mother's Day feature, are you in? I stared at the screen, the nursery glowing behind me, and realized, maybe I finally was. Standing behind the mic, I felt seen for the first time. The ballroom was brighter than I expected, not grand or glitzy, just well-lit, warm, buzzing with women whose faces were open, curious, hungry for truth. Rows of folding chairs filled the space between the stage and the buffet line, the air perfumed with perfume and nervousness. I stood just off stage, notes trembling in my hands. Not from fear, exactly, but from weight. The weight of story, the weight of being heard. Jake, the journalist, smiled as he handed me the small wireless mic. You're our closing voice. End it your way. I nodded, throat tight. Lily was in the front row, her curls tucked behind one ear, a yellow scarf looped around her neck. Sarah sat beside her, hands folded, a look of quiet anticipation on her face. Even James had come awkward in a button-up that didn't quite fit, hands buried in his coat pockets, like a boy waiting to be called in from the cold. The organizer adjusted the mic stand, the room and then I walked out. The lights felt soft, not blinding. I found the center, placed my notes on the podium, and looked out at the sea of strangers turned sisters. "My name is Evelyn Harper," I began, "and I didn't come here to talk about land, or lawsuits, or going viral." I paused. The silence was generous. "I came to talk about voice. The kind you forget you have, the kind you think you've lost." Heads nodded, eyeglasses caught the light like tiny stars. I was a mother who made herself small for years, who traded dreams for diapers, traded applause for patience, who thought being silent was the cost of being good. I glanced at Lily, her eyes shone but she didn't blink. And then one day I stopped asking if I was allowed to speak, I just did. Applause rose, brief but full. "I won't pretend it was easy," I continued. "I lost things, people, illusions. But I gained something else, a place in my own story, a say in my own legacy." More nods, a few sniffles. I reclaimed land, but more importantly, I reclaimed self. The last word echoed. I let it hang there. My journey isn't perfect, my healing is still in progress, but for the first time in my life, I'm proud of the woman I've become, not because she's loud, but because she finally stopped whispering. The applause that followed felt different, not polite, not routine. When I stepped back, I caught movement near the front. The mayor, a woman with graying hair and a smart navy suit, rose to her feet. She didn't say anything, just clapped slowly, deliberately. Then came the announcement. The event organizer rejoined the stage and read from a card. "Today we honor Evelyn Harper, for courage, clarity and contribution to women's leadership and legacy. Please join me in presenting this year's Empowerment Recognition Award." The plaque felt heavy in my hand, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to give it away, not to a son, not to a cause, not to the past. I held it, let it settle. Backstage, Lily hugged me so tightly I had to remind myself to breathe. "You didn't just speak," she whispered. "You landed." Even James came forward. He didn't say much, just pressed his hand to my shoulder. That was enough. Later I stepped outside into the cool spring air. The night had fallen, but the sky was clear. The stars weren't showing off, they just were. My phone buzzed. "Jake again." "Jake, congrats. Feature runs at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Title: The Woman Who Rewrote Her Ending." I smiled, not because it was catchy, but because it was true, and as I stood there, fingers wrapped around my new nameplate, the world went still, not empty, but ready. The story wasn't ending. It was finally becoming mine. He called me disposable today. I am indispensable. The ranch had never looked more alive. Wildflowers dotted the edges of the gravel path like tiny confetti. A long table stretched beneath the pergola, draped in linen, framed by mason jar centerpieces and framed photographs from all our tangled decades. The scent of coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls mingled with the breeze. It was Mother's Day. My first one where I didn't flinch when someone said celebrated. Sarah had organized everything quietly, efficiently. Her baby, soft and warm in a sling across her chest, slept through most of it. Every so often, she'd touch his back gently, like checking he was still tethered to this earth. Lily stood by the garden archway, directing guests to their seats. Her yellow scarf fluttered like a flag. Jake was here too. No notebook, just a plate full of fruit and a quiet grin. James lingered near the edge of it all, sleeves rolled, holding a tray of drinks like it gave him something to do with his hands. He caught my eye once, didn't look away. As brunch settled into laughter and clinking silverware, James rose from his chair. Fork gently tapped against glass. "I didn't prepare a speech," he began, his voice more sure than I expected, "and maybe that's for the best." Chairs shifted, heads turned. "I've spent a lot of time misunderstanding things," he said. "Mostly people. Mostly my mother." My breath caught, but I didn't. James glanced down, then back at the crowd. "When I was younger I thought power looked like control, now I know it looks like endurance." He turned toward me. She raised me on nothing but grit and love. She stood back when she could have shouted, and still I misunderstood her quiet as weakness. A pause. I was wrong. Silence, full and waiting. He stepped closer, lifting a tiny bundle from Sarah's arms. "This is Daniel," he said, "my son. And this is the woman I hope he grows up to respect more than anyone." He placed the baby in my arms. He was warm and heavy in that new miraculous way. His eyes fluttered open for half a second, as if to check on the world he'd arrived in. I didn't cry. I breathed, held him, let the weight of all I had carried before feel worth it for the weight I held now. Then Lily stood. Her hands didn't shake. She unfolded a piece of paper and began to read. "It's called a legacy letter," she said. "Mom wrote it weeks ago. I asked if I could share it today." Her voice was clear, proud. "To the ones who come after," she began. "May you know that legacy is not land. It's not money. It's not what they write on a will. It's the courage to become yourself in a world that tries to make you forget." Guests leaned in. I gave too much for too long. But I reclaimed myself, not out of anger, but out of remembrance. I remembered I was once a girl who wanted to matter. And now I am a woman who does. Applause swelled, slow, standing, certain. I held Daniel tighter. And then, without asking, James took out his phone and began to film. He didn't focus on the crowd. He framed the shot on me. The baby, the applause behind us. His voice off camera. "She saved all of us." I didn't flinch. I let it in. Later, as the sun began to shift toward the hills, we walked the new garden path toward the barn. Me, Sarah, Lily and the baby between us. James followed behind. A few steps back but not distant. The old ranch sign hung above us, repainted, restored. Beneath it a new plaque glinted in the light. "This land listens." We paused there. Beneath that sky, our laughter mingling with bird song. The camera lingered on our joined hands, our softened edges, the land breathing easy again, as if healing had always been waiting for us to arrive.